And yes, good day to everyone. I felt compelled to go live again just to discuss some of the things that are going on in the world with the Epstein files and Neptune and Aries and this profound awakening process that we are going through as a species. And this talk is brought to you by celery juice, clearing colons of demons and archons since ancient times. So let's dive in. So I posted quite a bold statement for this live. There is no salvation. And to elaborate on this, this is a Gnostic truth. And right now I am prepping my GAIA Sound Healing course for the Shift Network. And I am diving so deep into all my Gnostic studies for pretty much the last 15 years, the ancient mystery school wisdoms that were suppressed virulently, intensely, colonially, imperially, to the point where it is my belief that our planet, our species, has actually gone through quite a regression through the Dark Ages and such. We literally severed and fragmented the mystical aspects of ourselves that the ancient Gnostics and the mystery schools that go back thousands of years were cultivating in our humanity for a very long time in the spiritual universities of antiquity, the mystery schools. But of course, on a grander scheme, this wasn't a regression at all. This was a necessary, heroic journey that we've gone through as a species. And as I have been alluding to in a lot of my posts, with the release of the Epstein files, we are witnessing an exposure of what has been lingering in our collective shadow. What has basically happened since we've severed ourselves from our mystical arts, from the divine feminine, the goddess. All these things were pushed out of view, were attempted to be absolutely severed. But of course, nothing can be completely severed in this reality. And now we're witnessing this profound spiritual awakening, where a lot of the ancient arts that were persecuted, that were suppressed, are coming back into view. And this is timely, this is needed. And the Gnostic message is coming very clear again. And let me just state at the beginning that, to borrow from one of my inspirations, John Lam Lash, Gnosticism is not an alternative religion. It is an alternative to religion, in the broad sense that religion as we know it has been set up as a kind of spiritual authoritarian system where you have these elite classes of, to borrow from the Christian terms, bishops, priests, popes, who preside over, even enforce laws and edicts. And part of that is suppressing and repressing and even censoring and persecuting our own authority, which is a power that we have within ourselves. So the Gnostics, and a Gnostic is kind of a term like a Western yogi, someone who is devoted to the divine wisdom that is ever flowing through their hearts. As we're told, the heart is an oracle to this divine intelligence, what was called the nous. The Gnostics believe that the true authority is in you. You don't need an elite authority outside of yourself to tell you what to do with your life. Now, that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I know there's this very kind of vogue sentiment being posted all over the place with Deepak Chopra being kind of outed for immoral behavior. The time of gurus is over. And one of the things I really feel that we need to really get on board is we need to be a lot more complex with our thinking. We are so drilled into thinking things in duality that we don't know how to hold the ambivalence, the ambiguity, which is Neptune and Aries. I mean, Neptune is all about that. It's about really getting the mind able to hold multidimensional consciousness. And while I agree the time for false gurus and false spiritual teachers and wisdom keepers is over, because the light of consciousness is so profound, the divine intelligence of humanity is so emboldened right now, people are not falling for bullshit, I do believe we still need good gurus, good spiritual teachers, good wisdom keepers, because we are going through a profound spiritual awakening right now. It's as if the whole planet has become a mystery school. And that is just going to get emboldened and evolve as we move deeper into this age of Aquarius. Now, true guru, if you know the definition of a guru, the guru is one who simply helps the adept to remove the obstacles obscuring their own connection to the guru or the wisdom teacher, which is, according to the Gnostics, the earth goddess Sophia, which resides in the heart as a continuum, as a weaving. They want to remove all that so you really see that the true teacher, the true guru is inside of you. So, of course, one symptom of a false guru is someone who's creating a kind of servility with their followers, a codependency that is toxic, and that has to go, and it will go, and it is being called out, rightfully so. Now, yesterday in America, we had Pam Bondi appearing before Congress. And of course, it was one of the most reprehensible displays of government corruption. I mean, if you want to see, there were some like very archetypal moments. You know, I felt one of the most archetypal moments was when all the survivors of this horrendous global child trafficking, woman trafficking, men trafficking ring too, I'm sure, human trafficking ring, were there in Congress, and they stood up. And there's this image of Pam Bondi sort of looking away in ignorance. That is basically the divine feminine standing up and saying, I'm here, I'm powerful, and you better submit, you better acknowledge this rage, this righteous rage and pain and suffering that has happened to our human species. And of course, as Pam Bondi went through all the mental gymnastics to be in denial of her own shadow and the shadow of the world, it was increasingly humiliating and embarrassing, really. It was a despicable display. But what's important to really realize here is that, yes, we want justice out in the world. Of course, everyone wants to see the perpetrators brought to some kind of justice. And I see a lot of outrage of why there is not justice, and I want to really advise people to save your energy. Are we really surprised that there is no justice happening? I mean, if you have been awake to the government corruption that has been happening for eons, and I'm talking eons and thousands of years, the government's completely compromised. So there may be justice one day in the sense of like perpetrators being brought to prison, even worse. But I don't think we should hedge our bets on that. What I think we need to realize is that the work that each of us can do, because there's a true feeling of helplessness that is occurring right now. And we have to remember the outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And I'm not saying, oh my gosh, we're all satanic, child-eating pedophiles by any means. But we're living in a system that those people have propagated. And we are all dealing with a culture of degradation, a culture of missing the mark, which the Gnostics would maybe define as sin, of error they would more define, and deception. And so one of the most heroic and relevant things we can do right now is to look at our own lives and figure out where true integrity, a pulling together, a shoring up of our own container can happen, where we can actually start being morally ethical beings again. And reflect that in our lives, in all of our relationships, in our families, in our communities, so that we all become these amazingly magnanimous, great-souled humans. Because chances are we've all been hit by this poisoned culture that they've set up. And I know myself, dealing with addictions, dealing with egoic thoughts, narcissism is highly, highly propagated in this culture, especially in spiritual circles. And that goes really far back to just this human self-obsession we have with ourselves, especially when we divorce ourselves from the ecosystem. And we lost the ability to have an empathic bond with plants, animals, with the ecosphere, and became kind of like, aha, we are, the human supremacy complex, as I call it, is a dire one. Now, what is important is that we need to do this inner work. And when I go back to this statement, there is no salvation, it's really a form of guidance that I would like to give for those who feel resonance with it on the fulfillment of the inner work. So in the Gnostic teachings, and these are the teachings that preceded the rise of the Judeo-Christian Roman Empire, which eventually splintered off as well into Islam, all branches of the Abrahamic religious tree. These religions themselves have set themselves up as totalitarian, authoritarian systems, where you have a male patriarchal god who is off-planet, who rules over us very brutally, if you read the Old Testament. And it's kind of like a war god. And the Gnostics, the reason the Gnostics were killed, persecuted, genocided all over the world is because they came out of their mystery schools and they said, that isn't a god, that is a demonic entity, which they called the archons. And the Gnostics were brilliant polymath savants, adepts of many siddhas, as they call them in Hinduism, in the yoga world, like psychic abilities, clairaudience, clairvoyance, telepathy. And they had been observing all of these, what they call the archons, these intrapsychic species that were predating on us on a psychic level. And they came out of the mystery schools to warn people that a lot of these new kind of patriarchal dominator religious ideas were mind viruses, were distorted, incorrect thoughts and notions that were being implanted in the human mind from these archons. And the Gnostics were brilliant, so they would debate the zealots, the Jewish and the Christian zealots in like Alexandria and the ancient cities in the common squares. And the Gnostics became very reviled because they were just so intelligent and they were able to completely dismantle in debates and discussions the zealotry of more of these fundamentalist extremists. Because I don't want us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is mysticisms in Judaism, in Christianity and Islam, Sufism, Kabbalists, Christian Gnostics, even as they're called, who are adhering more to a more open, lithe, nimble form of truth that the ancient mystery schools, the pagans, the Gnostics would see as like a familiarity, a kinship with. And that's why you have, many years later in like La Provence in France, where you had the risings of these like Cathars, who were these mystical orders of Christians. They were tolerated from the other Christians around because they were like, oh yeah, we see, the kinship here in the beliefs. But one of the big criticisms, and this is like the crucial point of this talk I want to give here, this transmission, one of the crucial forms of Gnostic wisdom is that they rejected this whole idea of salvationist religion. They rejected that humans need to be saved. And the reason they rejected that is because they affirmed that we are already saved. We are already born. We are designed by the goddess Sophia, or whatever divine being we want to call it. And we are designed with incredible faculties. Like I mentioned, nous earlier. Nous means divine intelligence, the ability to be rationally clear. Rationalism, like emotionalism, they're all sacred aspects of our divine intelligence. And we're actually supposed to marry the two to be rational mystics. Emotions are more of our primary intelligence. If you want to do this inner work, and like I feel like this should be on the curriculum for all human beings right now, do The Presence Process by Michael Brown, because it's a book that takes you through a 10-week program of emotional alchemy and cultivating emotional intelligence. And one of the big problems in the world is these religions that have set up this authority system where we project out our ability to figure out our own problems. We give them to God, we give them to the priests, the rabbis. The problem therein is that we never actually figure out how to be self-realized, self-reliant, to work these things out on our own. Now, we can have spiritual teachers and wisdom teachers that can enthuse, that can encourage, that can help guide us and show us the way. But at the end of the day, we have to do the work. We have to do the work. We have to be the change. And the Gnostics were very clear because they rendered in opposition to what eventually became original sin, this very pessimistic and misanthropic, self-hating view of humanity as something originally sinful. The Gnostics were like, no, we have these original blessings within us. We have nous, we have this divine intelligence that is able to work things out. We also have the epinoa, which is the divine spark of the soul, which gives us access to creative will and creative imagination. And our creativity in itself is one of the most divine aspects of us. And this is something actually the Gnostics say the archons do not have. They do not have creative will. They can only mimic and make poor copies of what is actually real in reality. And they sell us these as even better than the real thing, but it just degrades culture more and more because we're losing actual quality. In a sense, the religions that were set up and became, formed into state powers were mimicry of the original Gnostic wisdom of the ages. But they're a bad copy of it. And in that bad copy, they shifted this authority sense that should be within to without. And that caused all kinds of problems. We need to do the inner work. That is actually one of the ways that we become tools of justice in the world, is that we bring justness into our lives. We take stock of our lives. We can make a list of all the things that we need to improve, that we need to work on, and we work on them diligently. Yes, there are angels. Each of us has a guiding angel, in my belief. I've been reading a lot of Rudolf Steiner lately, and he is very clear on that point, as is the esoteric writings of Edgar Cayce. We can call on divine support. We can call on God, or as the Gnostics called it, the originator. But more importantly, we should call on Sophia, the wisdom goddess that is ever guiding us in our hearts, what the Gnostics called the guiding realm. We need to build this self-reliance so that we become confident, emboldened with ourselves. This is why there is a Gnostic renaissance in our midst. There was a reflowering, that's what renaissance means, a reflowering of all this information so that we can become self-realized, become so confident, so self-governed, because we've done the inner work to learn how to be masters of our consciousness, to break down the patterns of self-destruction that have been conditioned into us. When you do that work and you start to climb the vertical ladder of the evolutionary path, as Samuel Alvar, the Colombian Gnostic mystic, would say, in my opinion, in my life, that has been one of the most joyful and most fulfilling feelings, that I can do this. I can actually evolve. I can overcome. I can transcend. If we start to pray to some external authority to do this work for us, to remove these things for us, and then we don't do any work and we just think that that's how it's going to work, it's just a gigantic spiritual bypass. And this is why in the last 2,000 years, one would think with the proliferation of all these religions all over the planet, if these religions were noble, if they were really truly evolving humanity into their divinity, we would be already in a fully enlightened civilization. And in fact, it's the opposite. We've seen war after war after war. It's actually been exponentially crescendoing through the 20th century, where we've seen the most horrific wars on the planet. And then on top of that, the biggest problem facing the planet is still our antagonism with the ecosphere, the sacred ecology of the planet. We've literally aborted ourselves from the sacred web, and here we are insanely still fighting amongst ourselves in these wars and skirmishes. Meanwhile, around us, the environment continues to collapse. And I will say that one of the other key aspects of the Gnostic revival that maybe I'll get into in another talk is that environmental breakdown, that breakdown of our relationship to the sacred ecology of the planet, is fundamentally rooted in the exiling of the goddess. Because in the ancient Gnostic mystery schools, the goddess is the earth, the planetary body that is the earth, and her soul body, her anima mundi, her body of light, which suffuses us, which interweaves with us. And her name was Sophia, which means wisdom. And we are the children of wisdom, and it is our great destiny to channel wisdom, to become wisdom embodied, and to co-create with Sophia, with the earth, a new sacred culture, where we can soul retrieve collectively all these forgotten fragments, bring them back together. That's why so much ancient wisdom is reflowering right now, because they've been forgotten. And we have this moment now where we have freedom. We have the means through the digital commons of the internet to gather all these pieces that have been cut off and constellate them again. And that to me is very profound and very amazing. That's why I've been feeling a lot of exhilaration, since Neptune in Aries with the release of the Epstein files. But of course, we must hold the grief. There is rage that is righteous. I mean, Aries as the warrior has some battle cries that need to be released right now. We need to look at what has happened, the compromising of all these human beings who have allowed these archons to possess their souls, cause them to go wayward from their path, betray their moral intelligence, their divine essence, and do the most horrific things to innocent children. And we should use that rage, all of that beautiful energy, and point it within to further and galvanize our inner work so that we become such incredible souled human beings that we start to just radiate and emanate this sacred culture that is so needed to contain, to help grow a true divinization of our humanity, to really unfold what is already within us. We are already saved. We already have everything that we need within us. We have just been pointed away from it. And we need to turn within and realize the awesome divine powers that we have, that have been bestowed on us by our divine mother, as the Gnostics believed, the divine goddess. And that is an amazing spirit of our times. So I'll leave it there. I hope you resonate with the message. Please feel free to share in the comments. And if you want to dive much deeper with me into all these things, on March 4th, my GAIA Sound Healing course will be starting on the Shift Network. And this will be a 7-week dive into all kinds of Gnostic ancient wisdom woven with sound healing and mystical music. And I feel more than ever that this course and my work being a Gnostic and a carrier of this ancient story of Sophia is more and more important, especially with what is being revealed with things like the Epstein files, and will continue to be revealed as our collective light grows and we see more in what is in our collective shadow. The meaning of the world is collapsing, and new meaning is needed, and that is one of our great destinies, to be co-creators of this new earth, a new mythos for humanity. So we must continue on, and it's an exciting potential. So thank you for being here with me today. Awen, the light in the dark inside of me honors the light in the dark inside of you. Namaste, Awen. And until next time.